All right, y'all ready to get started? Here we go. So I left you in a little bit of a lurch last week because I like messing with you. I gave you this situation, for those of you that weren't here, of a woman that was diagnosed with cancer. After receiving the diagnosis of cancer, she finds out that she is pregnant. Now, the cancer is aggressive. There are no guarantees anywhere. So if she goes through with the treatment, there's no guarantee that the treatment is going to save her life. However, she's going to die if she doesn't receive treatment. That is the guarantee. On the baby's side, the concern was, would she be able to live long enough to get to viability, meaning the place where the child could live outside of the mama and still live? There was not a guarantee there either. That is a genuinely difficult situation to be in because you have two intrinsically valuable lives that you're making a decision about. Y'all were a mixed bag on what you would do. I want to pick up there and talk with you about not so much how non-theistic people would necessarily try to resolve that issue. I tried to give you a little bit of a survey of the major non-theistic ethical theories. Instead, I want to show you two different things tonight. One is different theories that even Christian ethicists have advanced to solve problems like this. You know, where you have two things, perhaps more depending on the situation, that are in conflict with each other. What do you do? And then the second thing that we'll talk about tonight is what is called the natural law theory of ethics. And then next week what we'll do is we're going to start getting into just straight up issues. So we'll start with sexual ethics. We'll be getting into LGBTQ issues. We'll be getting into the hookup culture, which is a very popular thing right now, and kind of the ethics of that and the implications of that. But with that scenario that I gave you in mind, let me just start there. One of the ways that you could solve it, can everybody read my bad writing? If not, what you can do, Brian, stop it. What you can do when we're done is you can come and take a picture of it, and then you can translate it later for fun. That's what you can do. So here's one possible way of solving when you have conflicting values. One is to say it's what's called non-conflicting absolutism. Now, the big idea here is you have values that they're absolute. So nobody's wondering, is this something that we create? These are real values that you have. This would be one way to deal with the dilemma. And the argument would be this, is to argue that the so-called dilemmas only appear to be conflicts of moral laws, but they're actually not really conflicts. And that's why they call it non-conflicting absolutism. Actually, a relatively popular theory among theologians, especially Christian theologians. For example, there's a guy named Walter Kaiser. He holds this view. A guy named John Frame has also held this view. But the view says that God has given us absolute moral norms that absolutely cannot be altered. Just can't be altered. And any conflict is only apparent. It seems to be there, but it's not really there. In fact, it's due to a lack of knowledge rather than a real conflict in commands. That would be non-conflicting absolutism. One of the verses that they might go to ground this would be in 1 Corinthians 10:13. It says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." That would be representative of what a non-conflicting absolutist would say. There only appears to be a conflict. There's got to be another way. So, if you were looking at Exodus chapter 1, there was a situation. Let me get my YouVersion out for you. Well, I thought I had it up. And I don't. Where'd it go? There it is. So in Exodus chapter 1, there's this famous situation. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, the first whose name was Shiphrah and the second whose name was Puah, "When you help the Hebrew women give birth, observe them as they deliver. If the child is a son, kill him. But if it's a daughter, she can live." The midwives, however, feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this and let the boys live?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "The Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife could get to them." So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very numerous. Since the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Pharaoh then commanded all his people, you must throw every son born to the Hebrews into the Nile, but you can let every daughter live. Kind of a famous passage of Scripture. Y'all remember that one? If you're in that situation, you're sitting there going, I don't like what this person's commanding me to do at all. But in the case of Exodus 1, where a person chooses between, for example, loving her neighbor and lying, the reason the conflict seems to exist is because of a lack of knowledge in how to handle the situation. Or at least that's what this view would want you to see. Whatever the person must do to love her neighbor, she must do it without lying. Okay? All right. I just want you to wrap your head around it. Whatever you do to love your neighbor, you don't lie to do it. A lie is always a lie, can never be justified by a non-conflicting absolutist. Can never be justified. Now, some of you had no problem lying just a couple of weeks ago. Like Uncle Don here. Lies and the lying liars who tell them. If you remember in World War II, I was giving an example of World War II. You know, you're housing Jews in your home. The Nazis knock at the door and they say, are the Jews in your home? Most of you people are like, I'm not telling the truth in that situation. Well, a non-conflicting absolutist would say, you sinned because you lied. In this case, hold on to that. All right, so Mr. Smarty Pants in the third row said, I will sin and then I'll ask for forgiveness. No, you know who else said that? Martin Luther. He said the exact same thing. It's like, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to ask God to forgive me for the rest of it. And that was no joke. He was like, what do you do? And that sounds like something a non-conflicting absolutist would say, right? However, so in this case, the proponent would say that God honored the midwives in spite of their lying. In spite of their, not because of it, but in spite of it. What he commended was their faith, even though it may have been misdirected. So they were trying to do the right thing and they did the wrong thing. The faith was real, it was misdirected. Had they chosen not to lie, they wouldn't have been held responsible for the deaths of the children. That wasn't on them. Like, they're not the ones that are putting the children in jeopardy. That was the Pharaoh. Does that make sense? Okay. So had they chosen not to lie, I just want you to get it, they wouldn't have been held responsible for the deaths of the children because they would not have been the ones that would have killed them. Okay. That would have rested. Yes. Yeah, the death, but the death isn't on them. The responsibility in Exodus chapter 1 would fall to who? It would fall to the Pharaoh and the Egyptian soldiers that slaughter the children. So the proponent of non-conflicting absolutism is not ignorant of the effects. I want you to be very clear about that. It's not like you're saying, and God is going to always supernaturally intervene in the situation and all of the firstborn Hebrew children are going to be spared. They didn't say that. It's not what they said. They're not ignorant of the decisions that they make. Instead, somewhat it's been brought kind of similar to a utilitarian, kind of about the ends, right? They consider the results of their actions, and yet, even if their actions are ethical, they look at it. In the case of, for example, the Nazis at the door, it would not be unethical to tell them where the Jews are hiding if there's no other alternative, even though they don't want the Jews to be either found or hurt. You don't lie. You just don't lie. What are some other possibilities? They try to come up with a third option. Well, I'll give you one. You know, the Nazis knock at the door. Are the Jews in your home? And you go, I don't know. Or, here's one for you. As a previous class on ethics that I taught, one of the students goes, I think I have a third way. And I said, well, what would that be? He goes, well, I would just tell them, I don't know where they are right now. He goes, because technically I don't. Right? Now, he was actually playing on a technicality, but the way he was looking at it, he said maybe they were up in the attic when they knocked on the door and they're like, oh my Lord, I got to get out of here. And while you're sitting there jawing at the door with the Germans, they sneak out the back door. You didn't know that. You didn't know that. That was his solution to it. He goes, but you got to be precise with your language to be fair. I was like, okay, yeah. Anyway, that would be a third option. But in any case, it wouldn't be unethical to tell them where the Jews are hiding. Pay attention, if there's no other alternative, even if you don't want them hurt or found, because the values are absolute. And the reason that non-conflicting absolutists would hold to this is once you start making exceptions to things, you just open the door up. Does that make sense? You just open the door up. So, what about the scenario of a pregnant mother who has a cancerous tumor that will kill her? That's a little bit different, isn't it, than the scenarios I gave before. If not removed before the child is born, but removing the tumor would kill the child. Well, John Frame, who I mentioned before, in this type of situation, they would bring into play what is called the theory of double effect. Now, this a lot of times is put under natural law. We'll talk about it here a little bit more. I'll give you the conditions here a little bit later. But here's the big idea. What do we do in this situation? Well, whatever we do will have two effects. Literally like one action with more than one effect. One is positive, one is negative. Does that make sense? One effect is one action, one is positive, and the other is negative. And in a case like this, the proponent of non-conflicting absolutism would say it is permissible to try to save the mother because the death of the child is not intended. The death of the child is not the goal. It's not the intention. The saving of the mother actually is. And so the action that they're taking is an ethical one. They're seeking to save the life of the mother, not to kill the child. Does that make sense? Or does John Frame at least make sense? And since there's no real ethical conflict, the death of the child is a negative result of a positive action. It's a negative result of a positive action. That would be an example. So I gave you two examples for you to kind of wrap your head around what's called non-conflicting absolutism. Does that help understand it? And again, this is found in Christian ethics. Pretty popular theory. All right, you ready for the second one? Ready to go? It's different because it's called, well, conflicting absolutism. Okay, probably just by the word you've already figured it out now that I've already talked about non-conflicting absolutism. But maybe here's another way you can do it, is to admit that the conflicting values do exist. They're not just apparent, they're real. It's not just you needed more knowledge, no, they're real. You can't have your cake and eat it too. But you still have to make a choice. Make sense? This is the position of the conflicting absolutist. One example of a person that held to this, John Warwick Montgomery, he held to this view. J.I. Packer, the famous theologian, he held to this view. So this position is also sometimes called ideal absolutism, as it believes that ideally, like in an ideal world, God's laws do not conflict. You don't live in that world. And so in a fallen world, there are times where they do conflict. And they conclude that a part of the conflict is due, sometimes it's a lack of understanding on our part, but sometimes it is the fallen world that creates the ambiguity. And it's just the world that you're in. You don't live in the ideal anymore. That left the building in Genesis 3. So if you're looking for the perfect and the clean, where you can hold to your absolutes, come what may, that has left the building. And there's just an inherent messiness to the world that we live in now. So they say we want to affirm that there are real values. You're not creating them. You're not making them up. But you also want to hold to the fact that there's sometimes you're going to be stuck. And you're sitting there going, I can't have it. I can't have it every way that I want because of things that you, beliefs that you hold. This one is probably the easiest to explain. So when confronted with a moral dilemma, like the midwives, remember me reading about Exodus 1, the midwives lying to protect the children, or Rahab lying in, was that Joshua 2? Remember, right? What we must do is choose the lesser of two evils. You choose the lesser of two evils. So in these two instances, lying is the lesser sin than failing to protect the life of your neighbor. And this is where it gets to your point. I said I'm going to come around to, but Martin Luther had said something similar to what you said. In these situations, what we must do is admit that what we had done was wrong, and we repent. Ask for forgiveness. I wasn't kidding. Martin Luther said the same thing that you did, right? Yeah, you're welcome. You're like, hey, Martin Luther. In both of these situations, by the way, in both of the situations, so whether it's the midwives in Exodus 1 or Rahab in Joshua 2, what they would say in both these situations, God praised the women, not for their lying, but for their faith. Not for their lying, but for their faith, and doing the best they could in a ridiculous situation. He praised their faith. So in the case of the mother with a tumor, since we come back to her, it would be a greater sin to let the mother die without any attempt to save them both, since we never know for certain if the child will die. That's kind of how they would look at the situation. Does that make sense on the second view? Are you seeing the differences between the two so far? Now again, this is all in Christian ethics. All of this is in Christian ethics. So even Christians take a look at some situations and go, this is tough, but we need to do the best. We need to scratch our heads a little bit, because these situations are also real. Decisions have to be made. So there's the second view, right? Now that gets us to the third view, which is called graded absolutism. Graded absolutism. And this is the last way that we're going to talk about. The last way to address moral dilemmas is to argue that there is a hierarchy that is built into God's law. Right? And at times, some laws will supersede or have greater importance than other laws. Some laws are just more important. In other words, if you put it down to brass tacks, some laws are more important than other laws. That's why it's called graded absolutism. So you might have levels of value rather than everything is literally on an equal playing field. Does that make sense? Some things are just going to be more important than others. Some people that held to this view, there's a guy named Norman Geisler. He has passed away. Millard Erickson, very famous theologian, he also held to this view. So you're seeing some people that are very well-respected theologians. They're just like, and they disagree on this. If we talk about graded absolutism, what are some examples of where they would get this biblically? For example, they would point out Matthew 5:19. That it says some laws are weightier than others in Matthew 5:19. In Matthew 23:23, they would point out that some commands are greater than others. So they think that they're taking what they might call the plain-faced teaching of the Bible and go, it's telling you some are more important than others. And so this position can actually be explained pretty simply when you think of something like civil disobedience. You know what I'm talking about when I talk about civil disobedience?
Unjust laws.
Yeah, so you have something like the disobedience of an unjust law. It's not that it's not the law. It's that the law shouldn't be the law. And you go, well, what should I do? That would be civil disobedience. So according to Scripture, think about this. We're supposed to obey the civil government. But what if the civil government commands us to, let's throw one out there, worship a false god? By the way, I've got 2 more weeks in the current series on Sunday morning, the Like Jesus series. And then after that, we're going to the book of Daniel. Daniel got stuck in some mess. What do you do? And one of the things that he was told to do was what? To pray to the king. Pray to the king. And it wasn't pitched as if you feel led in your heart. You're going to do this. What do you do? What do you do? All right. This view, so the graded absolutist, built into God's absolute moral law of obeying government is the idea that we should do it only if it doesn't contradict God's law. That's what a graded absolutist would say. Your laws are legitimate only and insofar as they align with God's law. If they don't, I have no obligation to you. None whatsoever. And sometimes the only way to overturn a system is to buck the system. It's in fact virtuous to disobey. You get the idea. Some have pointed out that like Wilberforce, when you have systems that are in place that are legalizing slavery and you're pushing back against the system, that might be an example of something like that. This has got to stop. Martin Luther King Jr., civil disobedience. By the way, he had to go ahead and just accept the consequences of his choices. That's why he got to go to jail. right? Nevertheless, he saw the law as illegitimate. So you might arrest me. I mean, that obviously might be your prerogative to do, but it doesn't mean the law is just. You get the idea. That's what a graded absolutist would say. Built into God's absolute moral law of obeying the government is the idea that we should do it only if it doesn't contradict God's law. This is because obeying God is a greater command than obeying the government. That would be their view. Now, this view differs from the first two in two main ways. Are you tracking me so far, Army? You doing good? Two main differences. Here's the first. The conflicting absolutist says you have to choose between the lesser of two evils. Do you remember that? And then second, when you do it, you've sinned. You remember that? The graded absolutist says you must choose between the greater of two goods. And when you do it, even if it involves violating a lesser good, you've done something commendable. That's a difference. You've done something commendable.
Isn't that...
Brian, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on to it. Hold on to it. It's not so much about the lesser, choosing between lesser evils because you're choosing evil or evil. In this, it's like, no, you're choosing something good. If you want to keep it simple. But since you hold that there are some things that are more important than others, you're choosing a higher good, even though it's coming at the expense of a lower good. It's good and good, not evil and evil. It's a good and a good.
But sin is sin. Right.
I'm trying to get you to understand the theory. Right. So it wouldn't be a sin. It wouldn't be a sin. Because they're saying the conflict in the value is real. You can't have both. So you pick the higher value. Exactly right. Yeah.
So it's the bigger rule, the lesser rule, the bigger,
So,
is that what you're talking about?
yeah. Yeah. So, for example, if you were to go back, so last week I was quoting Jefferson, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? The right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. One way to kind of envision what a graded absolutist is telling you is one of those values is more fundamental than the other two. You don't have life, you're not pursuing anything. Nothing. Life, liberty, you don't have liberty. You don't have life. Pursuit of happiness, you don't pursue anything. You don't have life. Life is more fundamental than the other two. The other two depend on life for them to even be a possibility. That would be a way of kind of wrapping your head around what a graded absolutist would say. Grace, you have a...
Absolutist would put a hierarchy on God's law. So would that mean that they would justify an order or a hierarchy of the Ten Commandments?
No, so is something like, are they saying that there's a hierarchy, something higher than the Ten Commandments? Did I understand you right?
Which of the Ten Commandments?
Oh, like which of the Ten Commandments? Which of those is well, I mean, those are actually ordered when you think about it.
And Jesus answered that question?
Right? And so a graded absolutist would say, those are already ordered for you. Right? What's the first?
So when they were given, they were
No other gods before me, right? Yeah, so the graded absolutist would be like, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Let me give Armies your hand up.
How is the non-conflicting or the higher good not a non-conflicting absolute?
Wait, what? I couldn't even hear what you... I think you jumped two theories in the same sentence.
How is number 3 different from number 1? They seem similar.
How is number 3 different? Number 1 does not admit higher and lower goods.
No, my question was, how is that a higher good, not a non-conflicting absolute?
Okay, so with a graded absolutist, let me give an example. If you were to say, in Joshua 2, you have Rahab, you have them knocking on the door, were the spies in your home, do you know where they're at? And what is her answer? No, I don't know where they're at. The graded absolutist would say that she didn't do anything wrong in that situation with lying. Shouldn't do anything wrong with lying. And in fact, I think it was I may be wrong if I'm misquoting, but I think it was Geisler, if I remember right, that said that the lie is in fact virtuous, and to not do it would be wrong. Precisely because of what you're trying to do in the lie itself, which is not to give information and enabling evil in the world, but cutting it off. They're here to murder. So that's the way that Geisler would look at it. I know you disagree, but yeah.
What I was just saying is, doesn't all this though, because we're talking about Christian beliefs, depend on your faith in God and your obedience to God, whether you're that, because in
Graded absolutists would say it's not less of a matter of faith, and it's not less of a matter of obedience. It's not less a matter of any of that. It's a matter of you seeing what it is that God values more than other things.
Okay, that's good. That was good.
That's what they would say. I didn't even hear what you said. By the way, don't tell Wendy that I just said that. She's telling me to go get my hearing checked. And I told her, but there's a peace in not hearing the things. Yeah, it's the point is with the theory, if the values are hierarchically structured, then you're not committing a sin. There's nothing to confess. There's nothing to repent of. You don't live in the perfect world.
But this is man's view versus God's view.
No, be very careful with that. What they're trying to do is take situations, even in the Bible, where you can't have your cake and eat it too. Right? So it's an exercise of faith. For Rahab, for example, to protect the people of God rather than to yield to the king's men.
But it doesn't.
It's an illegitimate authority at the door. So it would be basically an act of civil disobedience.
Well, in Romans 7 it says, but if through my lie the truth of God abounds to His glory, why am I still being judged as a sinner? And then it goes
In Romans 7?
Romans 3:7. And
3.
Chapter 3, verse 7, and then it says, and why not say, let us do evil, for good may come. And then the next verse is, their condemnation is just. So they're still condemned for the lies that they said for the glory of God, because it's still a sin.
Okay, but that's not dealing with a situation where you have people knocking at your door trying to murder somebody that's been in your home. I'm just telling you the way a graded absolutist would tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
But would Jesus lie if He was in the same
Well, you do have parts in Scripture where God sends a spirit of deception. Who sent it?
But again, Jesus is without lie.
God sent it, right? So
He hardens hearts and He, softens hearts too. And He sent demons to mess with Saul, and so, but still, God is not the author of sin.
And a graded absolutist would agree with you. A graded absolute. See, the part that you have to accept that they're trying to say is to choose the higher good is not a sin, even though you can't have the lower good when you're choosing the higher good. When you can't have it both, and you're choosing the higher good, you're honoring God, and that's not a sin.
I don't think the Bible teaches that.
You may disagree with them, and that's fine. That's fine. But they're not saying it's the choosing of sin. And that's what I don't think you're getting. It's not the choosing of evil. Remember, the other was, you're stuck with having to choose between two evils. And they're like, I'm not choosing evil. I'm choosing a good.
Okay. I guess what I'm misunderstanding, because I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But are you saying it's okay? I mean, just because they believe that doesn't mean...
Yeah, I'm telling you that they're telling you there's some values that supersede others. They're just more important. And life would be on that list. Tom, were you going to say something?
Yeah, you've got Peter in Acts, where he's told not to speak anymore in the name of Jesus. And he said, whether it's right to do that or not, I don't know, but my allegiance is to God. It's to a higher authority, and therefore we're going to continue to speak in the name of Christ. There's no other name given among men
whereby you may be saved. Yeah. Yeah, and in Acts with Peter, that would be an act of civil disobedience, right? Yeah, so you have two values here. One is you can follow, for example, Romans 13, 1 through 6, where it says to obey the higher authority. And then the higher authority says, stop proclaiming Christ and in Acts, Peter says, that's not going to happen. But to obey God means that you violate a value in Romans 13. That would be an example of what a graded absolutist would say. We have two values that we actually hold, right? One, for example, would be evangelism, all right? But the other is the honoring of the government. Only insofar as the value of the government is legitimate. When they overstep their bounds, but that's a value that you've got. And when you can't, he couldn't have both. At least that's what you're saying, right? So he chose the higher value.
And it's not sin.
And therefore it's not sin because it's a higher value. That would be exactly what a graded absolutist would say. And so Peter would be like, I'm preaching on. I'm just going to preach. Now, he could be arrested for it. But and you with civil disobedience, you typically accept the consequence of it. Nevertheless, the point is when you have two divine given values, not man values. All right. Mike, did you have your hand up? Or?
Well, we were talking about Jesus. Jesus made this distinction. Jewish law said you couldn't serve certain things on Sunday. But if he saw something needed to be done on Sunday, he did it.
So you gave the example of, you have the Sabbath, and then you have Jesus like taking snacks.
He did healing.
Healing on the Sabbath and whatnot. That would be another example of what a graded absolutist would say. Something like that. The other thing that they would point out is this. Sometimes there just isn't a third way out. If you've got it, take it. If you've got it, take it. If you can come up with a creative solution, fantastic. So in the example of government, Tom, you were bringing up the example of government. Titus 3:1, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good, slander no one, be peaceable and considerate, always be gentle toward everyone. Then you have 1 Peter 2:3, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as supreme authority or governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and commend those who do right. And then the graded absolutists would probably look at the examples that we did. The government commanded 3 Hebrew children to worship an idol. That was Daniel 3. Was requiring Daniel to pray to the king. I think that's Daniel 6, I think. But he's requiring to pray to the king. Other options were not given. So what do you do? And the answer that the graded absolutist would say is what you, at this point, have probably come to expect. You have no obligation to pray to the king. None at all. In spite of anything that you find in Old or New Testament that's telling you to honor the established authority. Right? That would be an example of what they would say. So do you see the 3 main kind of views here? Is it making sense? All right. Now.
Okay, we go back to the pregnant woman though.
I'm about to. Well, with the situation with the pregnant woman, here's the problem, right? Is that you have the same value in conflict, right? It's not a matter of life and telling the truth. In this case, it's life and life. It's mama and baby. The other problem that you have is, we talked about factual issues. The part of the problem in this situation is you're not really sure if anybody's going to make it at all if you don't do anything, right? I mean, if you don't. Again, in that situation, it wasn't like, hey, you're going to be fine. It's going to be a tough road for you. It's like, I'm not sure she's going to make it to viability for the kid. It was a very aggressive form of cancer. So if, if you look at that, what do you think a graded absolutist would say to do? There's no guarantee even with treatment she lives, but there's certainly no guarantee that if she doesn't get treatment, she makes it to viability. Both are dying, very possibly. That was the situation she was in. What do you think a graded absolutist would say? Have any takers? Ryan?
You treat it, and it's not a sin if the baby dies.
Treat it, and it's not a sin if the baby dies. Okay? Laura, you have?
Either choice is the right choice.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you...
So one option is, an option that's off the table is what I was trying to say, is not doing anything is not an option.
No. What I'm saying is that they wouldn't have issue with choice A or choice B. You have to make a choice, and on this, with this being level, equal values, either choice is the right choice.
So you said
I
something.
said you can't make the second choice, because if you don't do anything for the mom to keep the mom alive, then the baby's going to be dead too, because the mom's going to die.
So yeah, so he's saying the second choice doesn't seem to be a live option. The reason being because baby's dependent on mom, but if you don't help mom, we're not sure there's going to be no mom, no baby.
I just have to say one thing.
Yeah.
Why is not doing anything not a choice?
I mean, you can, but
if
you can choose to say I'm not going to do anything at all. I understand that.
God can do the cancer, God can do the baby, God can
Sure, and there's nothing wrong with praying for healing. We do that here all the time. We pray over our church members all the time. We also recommend you go to MD Anderson when you have cancer.
I just meant from the
Yeah, and I think
of the absolutionists.
yeah, and I think and to his point, I think what he was saying is he's talking about what a graded absolutist would say. Could somebody say I'm not going to do anything at all? Sure, you could do it. But the pushback on it is you're not doing everything that you can do by prayer and medicine to help the situation. That would be the pushback. All right, we got one more thing to do tonight. Y'all ready? Because we're going to shift gears a little bit. Uncle Don's going to ask a question, y'all. All right, go ahead.
Before you move on.
Yeah.
Could you solve this for us by telling us which one of these three Dr. Jeremy Evans adheres to?
Oh, so which one do I hold to? Is that what you're saying?
Solve it for us.
Yeah. The interesting thing. Do what? He said. So which one do I hold to? Let me be clear. I actually think this is the misuse of a term. I think it's wrong. I pointed this out to you last week. Objective and absolute do not mean the same thing. They do not. If you read ethical theory, it is completely different. So when you say that a value is absolute, that means it is binding on all people at all times, at all places, with no exceptions. When you say that a value is objective, you could say that value is given by God, but it's not meant for everybody at all times in all situations. So when God commanded Abraham, take your son up on the mountain and sacrifice him, I gave you this example last week. That wasn't the command for me when Avery was born to take her up on the nearest hill. Right? It was a command, but it wasn't absolute. You get the difference? It was objective. Abraham didn't create it. God gave it. That would be an example. Some of the commands in Scripture, are meant for specific people, specific places, specific times, specific purposes. Not everywhere, at all times, in all places. And sometimes you have to do a lot of hard work to kind of pull out which is which. But usually the context answers it for you. So with that, I'm like, I don't like the language of these three. I don't like the language of these three. But I do tend to lean in that there are some things that I think are more in the sense of value than other things. I do lean more toward that. There you go. Do what?
Tell the lie to save the
Well, yeah. Well, again, you've got to be really careful. If your first action is to go to lying when you could have come up with another solution, you went the wrong way.
I'm at the Germans at the door.
Oh, that. Yeah. Well, like Corrie ten Boom and her family, right? Yeah, they're knocking at the door. And by the way, if I remember right, most of y'all were lying, right? Isn't that right? Did I remember right? Yeah. What that means is probably y'all were in line with graded absolutism, is my guess. Does that seem about right?
So how
Yeah.
do you grade it? Where do you get your value of grading?
Yeah, so I'll actually unpack that here in just a little bit. So the question is where do you get the hierarchy? When I gave you the example before, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you had a very clear case where others are dependent on something else for them to be what they are. Life is more, so to speak, fundamental than any of the others. Right? That would be an example. And by the way, that ties into another it's theistic view of ethics, which is called natural law. When you look at a natural law theory, the basic idea is that God has written His law into the hearts of everybody. Or if you were to put it into another kind of way to say it, there are some things that people can't not know. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. And the reason is because God has imprinted it on them to know it. Now, if you're to look, for example, in Romans chapter 2, Paul is speaking about this, the law that is written on the heart. However, you have people that suppress the truth that is in them. Does that make sense? It's there. And so when somebody says, for example, that, well, I didn't know that murder was wrong, you're like, well, yes, you did. And the reason that you did is because God wrote it onto you to know that. It's almost like an instinct. And in fact, you have to actively push that truth down to say what you just said. You have to act against the truth that is in you. This is in Romans 2, 14 and 15 for those of you that are looking. Even if you look, so I was quoting Jefferson last week, right? Did you catch how that began? We hold these truths to be what? Self-evident. What does that mean?
It's written on your heart.
It's written on you. You didn't sit there and make an argument for it. You just knew it. It's a truth that is self-evident. The way that the natural law theory of ethics goes, it's not so much that you know this because you heard or read a divine command. There's nothing wrong with divine commands. You can get that from the Word of God. It's that this was written on your conscience. There's actually a professor at the University of Texas named Jay Budziszewski. You're never going to spell his name. But he actually defends this theory of ethics as well as a Roman Catholic. Here's the big idea. You have human nature and you have human inclinations. What is the standard of truth in ethics? As an approximation, here's the idea. We can say that standard is in human nature. Be careful on how you unpack that. People should do what promotes the fulfillment of human nature. Now, what are the things that promote the fulfillment of human nature? And the answer is those that fit in line with the way that God created you. So, for example, there are some things that you can do sexually that do not fit with the way that God created the body. Your body is literally speaking to you. Does that make sense? That would be an example. And to violate it does not help you to flourish. That would be an example of it, right? What are some of the values in natural law? And this, I think, is going to get to something that you were talking about. Life. Life is one of the supreme values. From the natural inclination that we and other animals have to preserve our own existence, which is, by the way, good, we know that life is good. The way that we value it, the way that we protect it, the way that we or should value it, should protect it, should honor it. And negatively, the inclination implies that, for example, murder is wrong, because it's the opposite of a self-evident value. That also connects to procreation for a natural law ethicist. Now, Catholics actually typically take this like all the way out. What that means is this is where they get their anti-contraception views, is largely from this view. So the idea is if when you and your wife are intimate, if you're not at least open to the possibility of having children, then you're violating the natural law that's connected with the sex act itself, right? That's where they take it. That would be kind of why. There are characteristically human values, for example, like knowledge or sociability. Those are good things. You get the idea. But there's some distinctions here that I want to talk you through that I think you might find helpful in a natural law, and then we'll land the plane for tonight. And here you go. The first is what's called the principle of forfeiture. Like you forfeit a baseball game, right? So if you believe in line with the natural law that human value is intrinsic to you, right? Society's not making it up. It's intrinsic to you. It's intrinsic to you, to me, to my children. And I'm the same value as you. You're the same value as me. That's what intrinsic means. And then you go, okay, so Bob murders Jim. Bob goes before a jury. He is found guilty of capital murder. Skip the circumstances. He's found guilty of capital murder. The pronouncement is that he's going to be executed. One of the things that you're hearing out there is, I don't understand how y'all can be, meaning usually directed at the church, I don't understand how you can be pro-life and simultaneously, for those that are, pro-capital punishment. How could you, being for capital punishment, be pro-life? All right, you with me so far? And the answer is, it's this. It's called the principle of forfeiture. And the idea behind the principle of forfeiture is basically this. We didn't take your right from you, you gave it up. You gave it up. You forfeited your right. Does that make sense? So it's not that people that are for capital punishment deny the intrinsic value of the person that has been found guilty of a capital crime. They do. And it's not that they took their right from them. They didn't. You gave it up when you committed the crime. Just like you give up your right to freedom when you commit other crimes. Make sense? This is the principle on which, in largely Christian theistic ethical circles, that is grounded, is right there. Does that make sense? So when the question comes up and people throw that out, I'm like, I think you're like missing the point. We're not actually taking your life. You forfeited your right to your life. That's the way that the argument would go. Does that make sense? Okay. I just wanted you to see it. Because if one of the highest values is life itself, because everything else is dependent on it for them to be what they are, it seems like you would advocate for life come what may. Well, that's not necessarily true, even though you believe in the intrinsic dignity and value of life. Now that said, that's a different question on when do you use capital punishment for those that actually affirm it. You're going to have to wait on that because that's later. The second thing that we're talking about is double effect. Do you remember me bringing that up before? Here's the example. Here's an example. So you have a pregnant woman who has tuberculosis, wants to take a drug that will cure her disease, but the drug has the side effect of aborting the pregnancy. The question is taking the drug morally permissible? Well, the principle of double effect, which we talked about before, one action that has two effects. You with me? The principle of double effect justifies the taking of the drug in this case because of three conditions. And you can take a picture and discern my writing later. This is all I got. Okay, this is the best I got. Here you go. Number one. First, the bad effect is unavoidable in that the good effect can't be achieved without also the bad effect happening. It can't, right? So in the case of taking the drug, the good effect is what? She gets well. The bad effect is, and the unavoidability is in the treatment, right? So does that make sense? That's the first condition there.
How much certainty is involved with the treatment?
Yeah, in this case, it's definitely a lot more than the one that I gave you before, right? The one before is just genuinely, I mean, that one's just brutal, right? That one's just brutal. But with this, definitely much more treatable. The problem is you have a good effect, cannot be achieved without also producing the bad effect. Do what? And by the way, in this, and with this, I'm like assuming that nothing else could treat the tuberculosis and all that. The third option that gets you out, and I'm assuming that. That's fine. Here's the second condition, and it's here. The bad effect is unintended. The bad effect is unintended in that it is not a direct means to achieving the good effect. Okay? So think about it with me. It doesn't mean that the bad effect isn't a possibility or that you couldn't see it possibly happening. It doesn't mean that. The woman knows the drug very reasonably is going to produce an abortion. However, the bad effect is not intended as the means to the good effect. The abortion is not intended as the means to the good effect.
Collateral damage.
I mean, people typically try to avoid the language of collateral damage, but I hope you see the difference between the two. Hey, what's me the way that I achieve the good here? Oh, I kill the baby. No, that's not it. That's not it. It is you have an unfortunate situation. You can take the medicine, and you have a really high chance of being well. It's just unfortunate that you can't have the baby too. Make sense? That's the second condition. And then the third one is that what you're dealing with has to be proportionate. It has to be proportionate. So the death of the fetus is at least balanced by the saving of the mother's life. Right? If the bad effect were serious, as in this case, but the good effect were relatively insignificant, no. This doesn't fly. You see what they're getting at? Proportionate. And in this, since you're talking about an intrinsically valuable mama and an intrinsically valuable baby life, it's proportionate. If you're talking about convenience, sorry. That game just doesn't play here. Which is why some of the most ardent advocates against abortion rights come from this. Right there. Natural law theorists. And I'll tell you one of the best ones to read, and then we'll end it for tonight. Francis Beckwith. Francis Beckwith. Francis Beckwith is a Baylor University, Uncle Don. I got it in before he got the night out. Rex, there you go. I'm throwing it out for you guys. Francis Beckwith, and even in our own church, Johnny Buckles, I'm reading an article that he's just recently wrote for a Harvard Law Review, so I'm reviewing that right now. Beckwith approaches this both from a moral and legal standpoint from the natural law. And he's brilliant. He's really good. So, there you go. So, was tonight at least a little bit helpful for you?
Very.
Brian. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Because you know what? I haven't eaten. And I'm ready to go home and eat. I'm ready to get some snacks, y'all. Hopefully tonight was helpful. I want to say this again when you go back to here. People that I really do respect really do disagree here. I think they're trying to get at a genuinely difficult situations, trying to give solutions for people that help. I really do believe that. So there you go. But hopefully tonight helped as we were kind of unpacking some difficult situations. Next week, like I said, we'll start jumping into sexual ethics, LGBTQ issues, among other things. And so I hope to see you back. Hopefully it's of good use to you.
This was good. My writing's not near as
Well, Don
bad.
just said his writing isn't nearly as bad as he thought, and that just hurts. All right, I'm going to leave this up there for you if you want to take a picture. Otherwise, y'all have a great evening. So good to see you, gang.